So I am also on the board of a sheep company in New Zealand, as well as working as a futurist. And today I'm just going to run quite fast through the things that I'm thinking about at the moment and what we're seeing around the world. And some of you may have seen this quote already. I'm a big science fiction fan, and this guy, William Gibson, is a science fiction writer. And I love this quote about the future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And what we mean by that is this idea that we can often see signals from the future that are glimmers of ideas that turn up in the present, but might take a long time to turn out to be the future or even what becomes ubiquitous around us. And a good example of that in this picture here is virtual reality headsets. I've been hearing that the future is all sort of virtual reality for a very long time, but I'm in my mid-50s, and the virtual reality headset was patented before I was born. And the very first one was so heavy that you had to have it suspended from the ceiling and then poke your head up and under it. But these things do take time, and we often think that that these innovations turn up from nowhere, but many of them do take 50 years or more to become mainstream. And so, one of the areas I kind of wanted to think about this year is that we did pretty well in the New Zealand sheep industry in 2019. And one of the reasons that we did so well in 2019 was African swine fever. And it was a pandemic that swept the animal world. And we saw pork production plummet globally. This is a pig farm in China. You can see that if you had a pandemic hit, this kind of very highly intensive multi-story production of animal food is going to rip through a community quite fast. And so part of what I do for a living is I trained in epidemiology, amongst other things. And so I keep an eye on novel zoonoses for the sector, and I'm very interested in when animal diseases cross over into the human population. And so all of the previous pandemics that we've had in the last sort of 20 years, they come about every 3.5 years, and they have been pandemics where what we've seen is an animal disease cross over the species barrier into humans. So we can think about SARS, we can think about MERS. We see these on quite a regular basis. And I guess there were a lot of us after that boom in sheep protein, particularly in 2019, as for us, New Zealand, China is a major export market. They bought our sheep meat in a way that they hadn't been prepared to do in previous years because of the lack of pork available to them. And I think we'll continue to see some of these major pandemics as we see some places do major industrialization of their animal agriculture. So I was watching out for novel zoonoses at the end of 2019, thinking about what we'd seen with pork production and the impact that it had on our sheep sector. And I came across this in December, just an article about some doctors in China who had seen a respiratory illness. And at that point, I put it in my database and I thought, oh, that's very interesting. Wonder what will happen with that. And then by January, which is this article on the top right, this was the first peer-reviewed article that showed that the what we now call, COVID-19, but from that, that we could genomically track the virus from humans back to a pangolin and into a bat. And it sort of made me really sit up and look, because I was looking more for zoonoses in animals than I was for looking for when they might cross the barrier. And then on the 7th of February, two things happened. One of those whistleblower doctors in China died, and had been put in jail for whistleblowing about the respiratory illnesses they were seeing. And I started to take this way more seriously than I was before. I had been sending a few emails out to my clients or to other people in the sector saying there's something going on, But at that moment, we knew it was game on. And then the same day in the world shipping news, what we saw was the containers, refrigerated containers in China ran out. And that had major implications for a lot of us who are exporters, because if one country runs out of containers, the whole of the global supply chain becomes disrupted. And so it was February 7th last year that I guess I went, oh my God, we're actually up for something much bigger than we thought. But we still, I look back and I was quite naive about how long I thought it was going to last and what was going to happen. And I remember at that point putting out a bulletin to my clients and saying, we're probably going to see a year of global supply chain disruption. So that was February last year. And as you all know, we're still deep into global supply chain disruption. So part of what I think we also sort of need to have a look at in terms of what were big influences last year is this is the US beef production. So the red line there is 2019 and the yellow line was 2020. And of course, the big thing that happened here is that US meat processors, slaughterhouses were not ready for the pandemic. And as the pandemic struck, the biggest clusters in the United States market were slaughter workers, were meat processors. And we saw this impact for quite some time. And again, that meant that there was a shortage of beef in the US, and that shortage of beef in the US meant that demand for grind particularly was unable to be met. And so what we saw was that the American consumer is used to buying a block or a brick, as we call them, of ground beef in every shop. And because they couldn't access that ground beef, we found that they were willing to buy ground lamb for the first time in a way that really exceeded any kind of previous demand. And what's interesting is that when people went back to work and people went back into restaurants in the US, we were predicting a lot of the people in retail were predicting something like a 30% reduction in retail sales of meat this year, post the return to restaurants. And we've actually seen no decline. So people are continuing to eat sheep at a higher rate than they were in the previous year in the US market. And they're also buying food and cooking it at home at higher rates than they used to. So I like this idea that there's no disruptive technologies, there's only disruptive business models. And what I mean by that is that this tech can take maybe 50 years to become mainstream. But what makes it turn mainstream is that there's a business model, there's an opportunity in the financial sector that makes it work. So I want to mention what I call bundling here. This is my favorite butcher shop. It's actually in London, and it doesn't look like your traditional butcher shop. My daughter-in-law had their youngest baby, and you got that call that as a mother-in-law you actually really want, which is, will you come and look after the baby for a bit? And so I dropped everything, flew to London, and this is pre-pandemic, obviously. Anyway, I went to buy her. She said, I'd really love some roast beef. And I'm like, okay, you should have bought lamb, but, I'll go and get you what you want. And I went to the local butcher shop and I said, my daughter-in-law wants some roast beef. What can you give me? And he gave me this lovely piece of meat. And then he said to me, oh, well, how are you going to cook it? And so he gave me the herbs and things to go with it. And I'm a pretty good cook. I could have worked this out. But what I loved next was he said to me, what are you going to drink while you cook? And I was like, genius, And so he gave me a lovely bottle of Côte de Rhône. And then he said, well, actually, I think you're going to need two, because you'll need one while you're cooking and then one to drink with the meat. I'm like, sure. And then you might see in the bottom left of my slide, he said, well, what are you going to eat while you're cooking? And so, I ended up with this lovely selection of British and French cheeses in my bag as well. And so I'd gone in for just, a roast, and I'd come out spending 60 quid later. And then as I'm leaving, he said to me, go to Sandeep, to the grocer across the road, and he'll tell you what to put with it. Well, I could work out I probably needed some green beans and some potatoes, but I did it for the entertainment value anyway, and took it home. And I thought, what's interesting here is that this isn't a butcher shop in the sense that they think they're selling meat. They're selling me a meal. And I think this is part of when we think about business models for the sector, is us for sort of stop sometimes thinking about it as meat and its component parts. And so often what we do is that we think about selling those, we have pictures in our marketing of the blister packs of meat. But really what we are doing is I was actually providing mummy love. I was here because my son and his wife had called me, and I'm in the love business, not the meat business at this point. And I think that we need to be thinking a whole lot more about the way that we put meals together and we market our meat in a way that puts it in the center of the plate, obviously, but is thinking about that I'm here to love my kids, I'm here to love my grandchildren. What is it if we thought differently about our butcher shops and we thought about them being in the meal business rather than in the meat business? So related to this, we saw during the pandemic that more and more small butcher shops and often family farms move to a direct-to-consumer model. And we've seen this globally. So we're seeing globally family farms who are perhaps doing toll processing or their own butchering where that's legal, or we're seeing small country butcher shops and others go online in a way that the pandemic totally accelerated. And in many countries, butcher shops themselves, if they were standalone meat shops, suffered during the pandemic as people didn't go to town or they didn't go shopping. So these people who were doing direct-to-consumer have done very well, and they've known about direct-to-consumer for a long time, but it really accelerated the use of the web and meat sales globally. What we also saw was that for quite a long time, we were disrupted and we had to stay at home. And we saw the rise of online cocktail parties, of online, getting together for after work drinks. What we also started to see was companies doing online tastings. And I think this is something that will stay, particularly one I went to that was for Meat Women, which is a global organization of women in the meat industry. We paid $25 each, and we got couriered a block of a pack of lamb charcuterie. So there was lamb ham and lamb pastrami and various items and 2 beers. My husband drank the beers and then tried to eat half the lamb charcuterie on my plate. But we had a butcher then who came and gave us a tasting online. And what I loved about it was that women were able to come. They didn't have to organise childcare. None of us had to drive home. And I could see that these ideas of taking product and product sales and product testing into the home is much more acceptable now than it was pre-pandemic. And I think we'll start to see more and more of that occur. So when disruption comes, it's usually that we don't understand that the businesses around us are starting to change. And so one of the biggest changes that's happened in business in the last 20 years has been this move to subscription business models. And I spent a lot of my career in software, and 20 years ago, we started changing our model so that we stopped selling software and we started doing these monthly subscription deals where what you could do was pay every month and access it. So my company, we use a online accounting software that we don't own, we just pay monthly to use. And that has come into everything. So it's come into clothing. We're seeing people like Rent the Runway, where you can pay monthly subscription to own clothes. We see it with cars. And John Deere made an announcement 2016 that they didn't want to sell tractors anymore. What they wanted to do was move to what they call reaping as a service. So this idea that you could have tillage as a service, or reaping or sowing as a service, or baling as a service, whatever it is. And this idea of things becoming subscription is changing really rapidly. And one of the subscription models that did very, very well out of the pandemic was food boxes. So it got to a point where those subscription food companies like Blue Apron, HelloFresh and others, they couldn't take on any new subscribers during the pandemic as people moved to cooking at home. And those are massive opportunities for us if we can move into thinking about what does the subscription business model do for us as farmers. So as well as those changes to subscription, we saw a number of really interesting things going on. And I want to look to John Deere just because they spend more on innovation than pretty much anybody else in our sector. And so there's been some pushback to that move away from ownership and them wanting to have everything where they own it and you just get charged for using it. And what we saw was a big hacking scandal in 2017 with Ukrainian hackers. And what was very interesting about it was that American farmers were paying Ukrainian hackers to hack their tractors. And it wasn't a headline ever expected to see. And what they were wanting to do was to stop John Deere from controlling and having as much data about them. And so often when we see these big changes, we also see social pushback against them. And then the last picture here from John Deere, I laughed out loud when I saw it, but it is a tractor, it's a solar tractor with a 1 kilometre extension cord. Not that practical when you're out on farm, I don't think, but I'm watching it closely because as we start to see the move away from fossil fuels, I think we're going to see more and more of this on-farm technology that's run by solar. So not just our pickup trucks moving to being electric, but we'll see that all of our farm equipment is going to go that way at some point. But the early prototypes like this one often look a bit stupid and like you can't imagine that they're going to work in real life, but they figure it out. And what we're seeing too is that we're seeing massive investment into on-farm data. So one of the things John Deere has done is that they have GPS mapped most of the US farmland now, and they can write down to, know the soil types of each field. So it's kind of, I think that this idea of what data we will use on farm is growing massively. And I think we're not going to be able to get away from that. But it doesn't mean that the farm has to become more industrialized. We can use this data to be really more specific with any herbicides we might use or any fertilizers we might use. And I'm hopeful that this move to some more of this new technology on farm, whether it's genetics or whether it's about our soil and our forage, will mean that we can reduce costs and improve yield. So 2016 was the year that humans lost the internet. And what happened in 2016 was it was the first time that machines actually did more traffic on the internet than humans. And there are good bots and bad bots. And bad bots are the things like, you hear about what we call DDoS attacks, where people like hack things or they take a site down, you can't access it. But the good bots are all of the bits of equipment. And certainly on the farms that I work on, we see a lot more what we call Internet of Things, where we see sensors talking to each other, or we see electronic IDs on whether they're neck braces that help to unite like a mother, a ewe and a lamb, or we're seeing them to monitor animal health. So these are the good bots. And so just a quick kind of thing that I'm interested in is 2016, I saw that Tide and Amazon put out this fridge magnet. And if you tapped the little white button on it, a box of Tide detergent drops into your Amazon shopping cart. And for me as a futurist, I looked at it and I went, oh my God, that is the end of websites. And of course, it's not the end of websites yet, but we're seeing a decline in websites and we're seeing a rise in devices doing more and more ordering themselves. So after they issued that, Amazon put out this fridge magnet that's on the right there, that's a scanner, and you could scan things into your fridge and it would drop them into your Amazon shopping cart. And then 2 years later, Samsung and Amazon put out this fridge that's on the left here, and it has the sensors built into them. And so if you put something in the fridge, it senses it, take it out, it senses it. If you don't put it back, it drops it into your Amazon shopping cart. This is really important for us as we sell lamb, because what will happen here is that people are reordering the lamb they already bought. So to get them to change, if they're buying a rack from a particular brand, this will just keep ordering racks from that brand until the person tells them to stop. And so what it does is it changes our marketing from being perhaps online marketing to marketing right here in the kitchen on the fridge. And so what we'll start to see, and it's going to annoy the hell out of me, and we just decided actually not to buy this fridge ourselves, because I decided I didn't want people sending me ads and coupons onto my fridge, but some people will really love that. And so what you'll see here is that you'll see brands, if they know that you're already buying a particular rack from someone, what they'll do is that they'll try and market somebody else's rack, or they'll try and market, a shoulder from somewhere, or start to put coupons right into the fridge to get people to change. So this is the next real estate where I believe we're going to see marketing. And then the next item that I saw that I thought was interesting is that this Whirlpool oven is completely run off the phone. So I have an oven that I can program and tell it to start 2 hours later. I can go out, I can go and do something and come back and dinner is ready. But I don't have any option to change any of that except for when I'm programming it in. Well, this one, the Whirlpool oven, actually reads the recipe on the phone and programs itself from the recipe. And then you can also, using the phone, tell it to delay or to hold. I can see some of you smiling, like, honestly, this is going to be great for me, because when I'm outside, it turns out that something goes wrong. I need to hold dinner for an hour, or I want to delay it. It's great. But what really worries me is that, I have one of those scales that it's an internet connected scale. And during the pandemic, they said in New Zealand, and it's probably true globally, we turned into hunks, chunks, or drunks. And I know at our place, I turned into a chunk, like every time I stepped on the scales, it sent my husband and I a little text message because we were competing to see if we could lose weight. Well, it turns out that we didn't. But we know, so there's this internet connected scale. And what concerns me is that my scale and my fridge might now start to talk to each other and say, Mel, don't eat that chocolate, right? Think about it again, have the radish. But also perhaps the oven and the fridge could start to get together. And we might want to think about marketing via the oven, so that what we're looking at is that the fridge can say, hey, you've got potatoes and green beans and and some mint. What you really need is some lamb loin to go with that. And so the recipes become part of the marketing of how we get to market. And so I'm watching that quite closely. Of course, Amazon Go, there's this technology now that we're seeing all over the world of supermarkets, and where you can walk in, you have a membership, you pick up what you want and you leave. The concern I have for this, for our sector, is that Amazon wants us to have a standardized product, because there isn't someone at the checkout weighing things. And so my worry about this is that we're going to have to do very standard size racks, that they're not going to understand that we create a natural product, and that product might change in weight during the year. It might change in fat composition during the year, and so on. So I'm just watching this closely. So on one hand, as a consumer, I'm quite excited about the idea of walking in and walking out with what I want. But as a producer, I'm quite concerned about what pressure this might put on us to produce highly standardized products, and what that might mean for wastage particularly. So other big trends we're seeing is the use of what we call the fifth quarter, but the use of the whole animal for wider purposes. And collagen has probably been the biggest story of the last couple of years, is we all have to watch ourselves on Zoom even more. We find ourselves going, oh God, when did I get that old? When did that happen? And as a result, collagen sales globally are just going up. And I think that collagen is here to stay. It didn't really talk about it 2-3 years ago. I thought it was interesting, but it's booming to the point where it's even in the granola bars that are available at my local supermarket. We're starting to see also this segmentation by specific claims. So I think this is very interesting that there is glyphosate-free ice cream. The producer company that I'm on, Atkins Ranch, we do no GMO, antibiotic-free, GAP4 lamb, and we get a much higher price for it than many of our competitors. And we're starting to see these very specific claims come through as ways of getting a super premium. And of course, the big thing that we're all hearing about at the moment is regenerative agriculture and what it might mean. From our own experience, it's very interesting because pelts have been hides, just been rubbish this last year. One of the things I didn't see coming with the pandemic is that if we were going to sit around on Zoom all year, no one was going to buy leather pants. And of course they didn't. We sat around in our pajama bottoms with a nice shirt. We didn't put leather pants on. We didn't buy leather jackets. A lot of lamb hide goes to premium shoe production. People like Christian Louboutin, for example, really didn't buy lamb leather last year because, again, not only were we not sitting around in leather pants, but we didn't wear high heel shoes last year, and the shoe industry had a terrible year. And so when we think about using the whole animal, that whole market for hides was tough. But interestingly, we're seeing the fastest rebound is in the regenerative hide market. And we're seeing up to another $12 to $20 a hide for regen hides in the lamb industry. And so I'm really interested about this. I think it's taking over from organic. If I had to choose between organic and regen, I'd go regen. We're partnering with the Savory Institute, but I think there are many other ways. There are 140 different certification industries around the world who are doing regen certification. So I think this is still a very early industry initiative that's going to take some time to shake out. But I think we will start to see higher prices for regen casings, regen collagen, all the way through. And so there's the meat itself, but the wool and the hides and all of the others. And I know this has some real challenges when you have to overwinter indoors. But for me, I believe that you can have a very strong definition of regenerative agriculture that looks after the people, the farmers, looks after the planet, and looks after our animals, looks after our soil, that doesn't preclude overwintering inside. So I think we have to work on these definitions. And it's important for us to understand that the consumer will drive most of it, not farmers. And sometimes we get really caught up in the detail. So a few of the things that I'm seeing changing quite fast here are these bottom two graphs I'm particularly interested in. This is the cost of creating protein in a lab, so cell-based protein. The cost of it is plummeting. And at the moment, I don't know of anyone who's trying to do cell-based lamb, but certainly cell-based chicken and cell-based pork and cell-based beef are on the agenda, as well as cell-based fish products. I don't believe that they're going to replace us in the lamb sector because we're only really 3% of the global meat category. We produce a very high product that the story around it is so good that I believe if we continue to raise the standards of our industry, we'll compete well and we'll be able to get a premium for it against the cell-based agriculture. So I'm not concerned about cell-based agriculture, but I think that it would be unrealistic if you are particularly in chicken, pork or beef not to pay some attention to it. The global shipping crisis is not going away. I now think that it's got another maybe 2 years to run. And so if you're exporting and in trade, it's still going to run for another couple of years. There are no fundamentals that mean that our supply chains are going to be cleaning themselves up anytime soon. And I think it's kind of interesting too that we've got pressures on food. And the reason that Americans spent less on food during the pandemic is because they ate out less. And I believe that as they come back to thinking about eating out, we're actually going to see more of the rise of what are called ghost kitchens. So more of the rise of home delivery of restaurant quality food is what I'm picking for the next year as we have resurgences of the virus globally. And what we see is that people don't feel comfortable for long periods of time going out maskless and eating in public. So I think there'll be waves of it and then waves of coming back home and waves of it and waves of coming back home. So producer prices actually should rise in this next year. And the reason it'll rise is because of all of these issues with supply chain. But also, I think we're not going to see the move away from move away from supermarket as strongly as we thought. And so people will continue to order restaurant quality food, but a lot of it will be delivered to home. And then the last thing that, just to be really cheerful, is that we have to address climate change. It is coming at us. It's coming at our producers all over the world. And the connection between climate change and the pandemics really just needs to be clear, is that the epidemiologist in me knows that we will expect to see another pandemic within the next 3.5 years. Hopefully it won't be as intense as this one, but as animal agriculture in particular expands into rainforest globally, we're putting mammals into situations where they've never cohabited before. And so whether it's in South America into rainforest there, or Indonesia or China, we have to expect to see more of these zoonoses cross the species barrier and come into humans, and they will come into humans through agriculture. So we just have to be prepared for that. And then the other thing is that as the climate's changing, we're starting to see changes in the patterns of where insects live that can carry diseases like malaria and dengue fever and others. So not very cheerful, but the good news is that the resilience that we've built into our industry during this last year is going to take us through into the next period, and that we also know that the impact of sheep on land is much lower than the impact of many other animals that we farm, and we'll have to accept that our consumers will become more and more interested in the carbon footprint of everything that they eat. So that's pretty much me done. I'm excited about the sheep industry. I love it. I grew up, my very first summer job was rousing. I don't know what you call it where you are, but basically you run around the shearing shed and grab the fleece and throw it for the wool picker. It was the most exhausting job I've ever done in my life, and I'm sure it was my grandfather's way of making me go to university. But I've continued to stay in that sector for 50 years. So I wish you really well. And I do believe that we have a very bright future, thinking about the whole animal, thinking about where the premium prices are for our product, and also thinking about how we've managed to fill some gaps globally as pork has been in real trouble, and I think will continue to be in trouble. And as we've seen beef production take a bit of a hit, I think that we've managed to fill some really great gaps there, and I believe that we will continue to. And now that people have tried our product, they will continue to eat it. So thank you very much.